What is up, everyone? I'm Ethan. I'm a sophomore at Indiana Wesleyan. Matt called me a freshman. I've been in college for 2 years, Matt. Come on, man. But no, seriously, this is really a surreal moment for me. I grew up at Mount Pleasant all of my life, and now I get to preach my first message here, and it's a full circle moment. It's really cool. But Spencer and Matt have trusted me to kick off this series, which I couldn't be more excited to do. And the reason for that is because we're kicking off this series called Rise Up, and it's about unlocking leadership potential. And as I have started my ministry journey, this is such a great opportunity for me to lead. And so I'm so excited that I get to start this off and talk to you guys what it means to be a leader. The focus tonight is going to be how we can lead ourselves well as Christians. Now, you might be thinking, how does one lead themselves? I thought the purpose of leading is to lead others, which you wouldn't be entirely wrong, but how can you lead others if you can't lead yourself? Think of it like this. Someone asks you for advice on how to not procrastinate on their homework. The person responds, well, that's easy. All you have to do is create a schedule of when you need to get your things done so that you don't push it off, or make deadlines so that you get it done on time, or maybe break up your work into smaller chunks so that you can just work on it slowly. All of these are great things to do if you don't want to procrastinate, but anyone can look these up on Google. That's exactly what I did, because I'm the complete opposite. I am a procrastinator. See, I procrastinate all the time. It's not a great trait of mine, but I procrastinate. I always have the occasional missing assignment. Mom, please don't kill me. Also, I push off my work until the very last minute, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for bad reasons. I tend to think I have more time on my hands than I do, and then I'm like, once I get to the point where I don't have any time, I start freaking out, and I'm like, I wonder why that happened. It's because I procrastinate. So I'm not encouraging procrastination at all. Don't be a procrastinator. It's terrible. It doesn't work. I know it's awesome when you're procrastinating because you don't feel like you have any homework. And then you get to the deadlines and you're like, oh boy, I have like 5 assignments. They're all due at midnight. And, now I'm scared that I'm going to fail. But the moral of the story is that I can give someone advice on how to not procrastinate. But am I really leading them well? If I'm giving them all of these tips, but I don't apply it to my own life, they're just going to think my advice sucks. If they see that I have all these missing assignments and I'm procrastinating my work, they're going to be like, well, obviously that advice doesn't work, which is not the case at all. That advice actually is really good for not procrastinating. I just don't apply it to my own life. So because I'm not leading myself well, I'm being a poor leader to the people around me. And even if people don't see the mirage that I'm putting on that, I don't procrastinate, God ultimately does, and that's what matters. So tonight the goal is this. Am I leading myself well, and how do I accomplish that? In order to lead others, we first have to lead ourselves. So keep that in mind as we go through the message tonight. The main passage that we're going to be in tonight is 1 Samuel 16, 1 through 13. So if you guys want to pull that up and just have that ready, we're going to be there soon. So this is the part in 1 Samuel where Samuel anoints David to be the next king of Israel. And to give some context, it is important that we look a little bit before when David gets anointed to be the next king of Israel. So the Israelites, they're going through the wilderness, they're with Moses, and all these other nations have kings, but they have never had a king. And so they're begging God, can we please have a king? We want to be like other nations. And so finally, God gives them their first king, and that first king is Saul. And Saul's king for a little bit, and then he makes a big mistake. He disobeys God, and he disobeys him big time. And so God's like, it's time that this nation is stripped from you. And so because of his disobedience, he takes away the kingdom from Saul, and he looks for his next king, and that is David. And so that is where we are going to get into in 1 Samuel 16, 1 through 13. So if you're there, please read along. Now the Lord said to Samuel, "You have mourned long enough for Saul. I have rejected him as king of Israel, so fill your flask with olive oil and go to Bethlehem. Find a man named Jesse who lives there, for I have selected one of his sons to be my king." But Samuel asked, "How can I do that? If Saul hears about it, he will kill me." "Take a heifer with you," the Lord replied, "and say that you have come to make a sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you which of his sons to anoint for me." So Samuel did as the Lord instructed. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town came trembling to meet him. "What's wrong?" they asked. "Do you come in peace?" "Yes," Samuel replied. "I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Purify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice." Then Samuel performed the purification rite for Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice too. When they arrived, Samuel took one look at Eliab and thought, "Surely this is the Lord's anointed." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Don't judge by his appearance or height, for I have rejected him. The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Then Jesse told his son Abinadab to step forward and walk in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, "This is not the one the Lord has chosen." Next Jesse summoned Shemaiah. But Samuel said, "Neither is this the one the Lord has chosen." In the same way, all 7 of Jesse's sons were presented to Samuel. But Samuel said to Jesse, "The Lord has not chosen any of these." Then Samuel asked, "Are these all the sons you have?" "There is still the youngest," Jesse replied. "But he's out in the fields watching the sheep and the goats." "Send for him at once," Samuel said. "We will not sit down to eat until he arrives." So Jesse sent for him. He was dark and handsome with beautiful eyes, and the Lord said, "This is the one, anoint him." So as David stood there among his brothers, Samuel took the flask of olive oil he had brought and anointed David with the oil. And the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David from that day on. And then Samuel returned to Ramah. So the first point that I want to make is that God chooses us to lead. Samuel was told by the Lord that he was to appoint one of the sons of Jesse in Bethlehem to be the next king. We see in verse 1 that it says, "Now the Lord said to Samuel, 'You have mourned long enough for Saul. I have rejected him as king of Israel, so fill your flask with olive oil and go to Bethlehem. Find a man named Jesse who lives there, for I have selected one of his sons to be my king.'" This choice is by God and God alone. Samuel had no part in picking who the next king would be, but God directed him to the right person. Now, I said that this is God's choice. We see in this passage that what God might be looking for in a leader is not exactly what we look for in a leader. Verses 6 and 7 say, "When they arrived, Samuel took one look at Eliab and thought, 'Surely this is the Lord's anointed.' But the Lord said to Samuel, 'Don't judge by his appearance or height, for I have rejected him. The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart.'" God says that we are not chosen by our outward appearance, but instead we are chosen by our heart. We, as people, tend to pick leaders that stand out with outward appearance. Think of it like this. You tend to pick the 6'5" football player who's super athletic and is the best on the team. You're like, "Oh, he should be the leader." Or maybe it's the really smart kid in your math class to be the one that leads your class project because, he's going to get me the best grade that I can get. But the thing is that God doesn't look at any of that. So don't think that you have to be the smartest or you have to be the most athletic to be chosen to lead. Because again, God is looking at our hearts. Be someone with a heart in the right place because God will use you and wants to use you. If you don't believe me, just look at David. He wasn't even at the purification ceremony with everyone when Samuel came. Instead, he was with the sheep and the goats out in the field. He was a shepherd. And he was not invited to his own purification ceremony with his family. That's crazy. It was almost like they saw him as this, yes, he's one of Jesse's sons, but there was no way he was going to be the one that was going to be picked as king. But again, that didn't matter to God because God rejected all of the other brothers and got Samuel at the end to David so that he could anoint him by God. You right now might be feeling that you aren't fit to lead, because you aren't the most athletic on the team. You're not the smartest in class, and maybe you don't even feel like you're so new to this Christianity thing that God can't use you, that you can't lead because, this is new stuff. But again, God looks past your appearance, past your skills, and past even your Bible knowledge. What stood out from all of David's brothers was not his appearance, skills, and even age. We see in verse 11, "Then Samuel asked, 'Are these all the sons you have?' 'There is still the youngest,' Jesse replied, 'but he's out in the fields watching the sheep and the goats.' 'Send for him at once,' Samuel said. 'We will not sit down to eat until he arrives.'" So David was the youngest, We also see in 1 Timothy 4:12, it says, "Don't let anyone think less of you because you are young. Be an example to all believers in what you say, in the way you live, in your love, your faith, and your purity." Not even age gets in the way for God being able to use you to lead. It's not what he sees. It is someone with the right heart. If David didn't have that right heart, if David did not have a heart for the Lord, he would not have been chosen to lead. In 1 Samuel 13:14, when Saul had disobeyed God, Samuel says to Saul, "But now your kingdom must end, for the Lord has sought out a man after his own heart. The Lord has already appointed him to be the leader of his people, because you have not kept the Lord's command." The key takeaway from this is the Lord has sought out a man after his own heart. Other translations read it as a man after God's heart. All God cared about was that the person that he was looking to lead his nation, Israel, was someone who was seeking God and after his heart. God is looking for people who are obedient, unlike Saul. People who have faith and trust in God and are seeking to do what God has for them. Almost all of you have probably heard the story of David and Goliath. Raise of hands, how many people have heard David and Goliath? It's a pretty popular story. You don't even have to be a Christian to hear it. People talk about it all the time. David had to have a lot of faith in God that he was going to be able to take on Goliath. David didn't have faith in his skills of fighting. He didn't have, lack of faith that because he was shorter, he was younger in age, his appearance did not match to who Goliath was, that he was not going to be able to beat Goliath because he had faith in God. He trusted God in that time, because he knew that God had chosen him to lead. Now, when God chooses us to lead, he's not going to leave us out to dry, which leads me into my second point. God equips us to lead. God gives us the tools and prepares us to lead ourselves and others. The last verse of our passage in verse 13 says, "So as David stood there among his brothers, Samuel took the flask of olive oil he had brought and anointed David with the oil. And the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David from that day on. Then Samuel returned to Ramah." Once God had chosen David, Samuel anoints David, and the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. God chose David to lead, and then he gave him the Spirit. He gave him himself so that David would be equipped to lead. He didn't say, "Hey, David, I chose you to lead. You're on your own, dude." No. He gave himself to him. He gave him the power of the Holy Spirit to lead. But that's the great thing, is that it's not just for David. God also gives us the power of the Spirit as well. Romans 8:11 says, "And if the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead is living in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies because of his Spirit who lives in you." So again, not only does David have the Spirit, but we also have the Spirit because of Jesus, and that Spirit is living inside us, meaning that wherever we go, God is with us. The Spirit is with us, and because of that, we have the power to lead. Hebrews 13:21 says, "May he equip you with all you need for doing his will. May he produce in you, through the power of Jesus Christ, every good thing that is pleasing to him. All glory to him forever and ever. Amen." God is reassuring us that when he chooses us to lead, he is going to come alongside us. He is going to be there every step of the way. It's not going to be part of the time. It's not only going to be when you really, really need his help. No. Instead, it's everywhere and every time we need him, he is there because he has chosen you and he wants you. In my own life, I have not been one for public speaking. It has always been something that I struggle with. I was the kid shaking the entire 3-minute presentation for school, freaking out all day that I had to do this 3-minute presentation, and now God's having me get up here and start preaching sermons. Public speaking is not my thing. Now, don't get me wrong, I still get very nervous. Like, I was freaking out back there. You can ask all the leaders, I was terrified. I just get super nervous for public speaking. But the thing that's different about me being in school and now is that every time that I go to God and I pray, "God, please calm my nerves. Please help me to be able to get up here and speak," my nerves just fade away. I probably was shaken when I walked up here, but right now, body is not shaken. I am as firm as a wall. But yeah, so those nerves have faded away, and I don't believe that's because, I just magically got good at public speaking or, got over my fear. No, that's because God came alongside me. He gave me the Spirit, and I have that power to lead. So God is with you every single step of the way. God took my weakness of public speaking because I took on a call of ministry and part of ministry is preaching and teaching, and those things require public speaking, and I hate public speaking, but we're getting better at it, and it's happening. So God took that weakness, and he's turned it into a strength. He's able to use me. He is able to speak through me in my weakness because he equipped me to do so. It's not by my own strength, but by God's. Although after all of this, I believe that there is a massive part that we all play when it comes to being equipped to lead. And that is that our heart condition. We have to lead ourselves first before we can lead others. And so that's where my last point comes in. God calls us to lead ourselves. God has chosen us to lead. He has equipped us for it. But before we can lead, we first have to lead ourselves. Because like David, our heart has to be one after God's own heart. The verses that came to mind when I was pondering on what it means to lead ourselves was Romans 12, 1, 2. I have it on my bracelet right here. I had another bracelet. I lost it. But yeah, Romans 12, 1, 2 came to mind. And that reads, "And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all he has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind he will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect." These verses capture what it means to have a heart after God, a heart that is transformed by God, a heart that is seeking to think and act as God would in order to please God. It is a call to deny the world, to give up trying to fit in to what society wants you to be, to give up on thinking what society thinks of you, but instead it is somebody that you want to be for God. It is chasing after that image that reflects Christ. Someone who is different from the world is someone who is chasing God's heart just like David did. Someone who is prepared to lead others. If our hearts are of the world, then how could we lead others? Because we aren't fit to lead. You see, Jesus says in Matthew 7, 1 through 5, "Do not judge others, and you will not be judged. For you will be treated as you treat others. The standard you use in judging is the standard by which you will be judged. And why worry about a speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? How can you think of saying to your friend, 'Let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye,' when you can't see past the log in your own eye? Hypocrite! First, get rid of the log in your own eye, then you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye." See, we can't lead others if we can't lead ourselves. How can we guide people through their struggles and guide people to look like Christ if we have no growth in our own struggles and we're not striving to reflect Christ at all in our own lives? Because that would make us a hypocrite. It goes back to what I said at the beginning about giving advice on how to not procrastinate. If I'm not going to apply it to my life, then it's hypocrisy. I am just telling somebody to do something I'm not willing to do by myself. And that's not leading somebody well. So to prepare our hearts for leading ourselves, we should be producing fruit in our lives. John 15:5 says, "Yes, I am the vine. You are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing." Fruit is the things that embody what it looks like to be like Christ. For example, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. You guys know these as the fruits of the Spirit. And these things are what embody what it means to be a Christ follower. These are attributes that we should be producing in our life because those things reflect Christ. John 15, verse 8 says, "When you produce much fruit, you are my true disciples. This brings great glory to my Father." See, when we are producing fruit, we are bringing glory to our Father. Who doesn't want to bring glory to our Father? That sounds like, to me, someone who is producing fruit is somebody who is after God's heart, just like David was. So here's the thing. If any of you fell asleep out here, or if any of you have zoned out, I want you to hear this point. And that is, if our heart is one that is after God's own heart, God is going to use you to lead. And that should be a thing that gets you excited. We should be excited that God can choose us to lead. 1 Samuel 16:7b says, "The Lord looks at the heart." See, none of this matters if we don't apply it to our own lives. I want to give you some insight on why our heart matters so much to God in my own life. See, it wouldn't be fair if I came up here and I just told you all these things that the Bible tells you to do, and I didn't give you any practical ways in how to see it in your own life, how to grow in your own life. It would just be like, the math teacher that gets up, teaches a lecture, but he doesn't help you at all, like after the lecture. You're just stuck there trying to figure it out on your own. That's not fair. So senior year of high school, my outward appearance to others was great. I had just accepted my call to ministry at Move before my senior year. I looked like a super Christian to everyone. I went from wanting to be a pediatrician to being youth ministry, youth pastor. And everyone was like, dude, that's awesome. And I was like, I know, right? But that really wasn't the case because, matter of fact, I didn't touch my Bible my entire senior year, not the entire year. Prayer wasn't much better. The only thing I did was ask God for this, ask God for that, and it was just want. God, I want this, can you do this for me? Which that's not how we should talk to God. I was just always trying to get something from him. I was struggling with classes, I worked all the time, and I just didn't make time for God. At school and work, I cussed like a sailor, and I didn't care. I thought I was cool. I don't know, people do it. Safe to say that my heart was not in the right place, which makes total sense why no opportunities that year came to fruition. See, there were opportunities. That's the thing. People were asking if I wanted to lead in this and that. But none of those doors stayed open. They all shut in my face. And I think the reason for that is because my heart wasn't in the right place. God knew that I wasn't ready to lead others because I wasn't leading myself right. How can I go teach people about the Bible, run a Bible study, or pray with people if I'm not doing it in my own life? Again, it's all about, if I'm not applying it to my own life, then how can I go tell somebody to go do it themselves? How can I lead somebody in that? My heart changed from being that one person. My heart changed from being one that put myself first and gave my time and attention to worldly desires to a heart that started making time to talk to God in prayer and crack my Bible open. That is when leadership opportunities opened. And it was right before the summer. I got to lead the college discipleship group the year before college. Matt asked me, and it worked out. I got to do a middle school camp and work with a bunch of middle schoolers and teach them about Jesus and minister to them. It was awesome. But the only reason that those things happen is because my heart had started to be transformed. I started to stop doing things that the world wanted, and I started to do things that God wanted. Now, I'm not going to lie to you guys that it wasn't like, I just decided, okay, I'm all in, God. I'm going to start reading my Bible an hour a day, praying for 5 hours. I'm going to be a super duper duper like crazy good Christian. No, I started little. It started first with me opening my Bible again. And it wasn't even my Bible. I was opening my electronic Bible. I was reading the verse of the day on YouVersion, and I was like, this is good, one verse, I can do this. I started to just pray a little bit, every once in a while. But it's important that you find a time that you can do these things. See, I was swamped with work. I was swamped with school. So, even in the summer, I was swamped with work. I worked all the time, I just work a lot, I guess. But I had to find a time that I could fit God in, which is sad to say. It should be the other way around, but with our busy lives, sometimes it really is just hard to find time for God. And so I looked at my whole schedule and I said, when do I have time for you, God? And it was right before bed. There's nothing other than it's time to go sleepy. Then, I can read my Bible, I can pray, but there was no other commitments other than, going to bed. And so, over time, as I read Scripture more, I started little. It was just that YouVersion verse. Then maybe to a 5-minute devotional. And then it was to, I started to get more invested. I was like, this stuff, I love this. This is awesome. And so I started reading my Bible more and more, and now it became something that I wanted to do, all because I started small. I practiced the spiritual discipline of just reading my Bible, and I didn't tell myself that I had to start all, as big as I can, because that doesn't work. It's not realistic. It's the same thing with prayer. I was like, okay, God, I'm always asking for things from you. I think it's time that, I start having some structure with my prayer. And so that's when I started praying the Acts prayer. And the Acts prayer is A, for adoration to God, C, for confession, T for thanking God, and S for supplication. And supplication I was really good at. That's the one where you just ask people. Adoration is saying, God, you are good. God, you are loving. God, you are caring. Confessing my sins, that one's pretty self-explanatory. I was like, God, this is what I've done wrong. Please forgive me. And then thanking God for everything that he had done in my day. And as I prayed this prayer over and over, it started to just become natural. It just became how I prayed my prayers. But my prayers stopped being this, God, I want this. God, I need this. And instead, it became something that I wanted to do because I got to talk with God. I was like, ooh, it's bedtime. I get to talk to God now, And because of that, I started praying in the morning. I started praying, on my way to classes. That picked up when I got to college. You have to walk really far to class. So it was like, okay, what better thing to do than pray? But it became something that became more a part of my daily life. But I'm saying that you guys don't have to start big. Start little. So in order for God to use us to lead, we have to realize that we have to be in a relationship with him. For God to use me, for God to use you guys, we have to be in a relationship with him. God chose me and provided me the tools to lead, but I didn't have the heart to lead myself. So I challenge each and every one of you to make God a priority in your daily life. Let him shape your heart and transform you. Don't do what the world thinks is cool. Don't do what the it thing is at the time that the world is all going crazy about. But instead, ask God to lead you and ask God to choose you to lead by letting your heart be transformed by him. See, if it's not for God, then it's not worth it. Because at the end of the day, all these worldly things won't matter anymore. It's about getting to be with our Father up in heaven. And all we can do on earth right now is glorify him and lead others to him. So imagine this. Imagine a world where you've decided to allow God to transform your heart. You've started to do things that bring you closer to him. And because of that, your relationship has gone stronger. And because of that, God has chosen you to lead. And because of that, you're the reason why your best friend or why some random stranger finds their way to Christ, because God chose you to lead. And because of that, somebody gets to experience the great gift of salvation because of what Jesus did on the cross. That's what it means when we allow God to lead us. It doesn't have to look like coming up on stage and preaching. It can be as simple as just leading the friend in your life on a better path, on a path to Christ. So again, make God a priority in your life. It can start as simple as just praying a little bit before you go to bed, reading one verse. But whatever works for you, whatever helps build your relationship with God, do that. God chose David for his heart. He didn't choose him for his appearance. He chose him for his heart because he sought after God. So all we have to do is seek after God, and God is going to choose us to lead.